Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's that time of week again, everybody's favorite segment here on the channel, the MLB Power Rankings. I hope everybody is having an amazing Father's Day. I'm a couple of months away myself from becoming a father, my first child on the way, and my daughter. I'm super excited for that. Right now, I'm only a Frenchie dad, so I'm wearing this, but it's a big day in the MLB. Father's Day is always a big moment. We're getting to be about halfway through the season, so the power rankings is starting to get a little bit intense. The bottom row, I think for the most part, is pretty clear. Number 25 has shifted and shuffled a little bit, and we got a new one there this week. The top row, we got top 5, pretty concrete so far this season. Number 6 is starting to solidify there. But I think the biggest disagreement most people are going to have is these middle 3 rows. We have 13 teams right now that are between 450 and 500 win percentage. It's so tight. So when I get to these I try to figure out who I think's playing better, but also who I think would win in a best of 7 should they face each other. Of course, a lot of these teams, they have streaky times. It's going to drop them down the rankings. Some of their injuries might be starting to add up. Some teams might have guys coming back that might impact that. But we're going to jump into it. And before I do, I just want to say thank you to all the subscribers out there. And if you are not, please subscribe. It's something I ask for probably every week, because if I don't, nobody does. So I'm going to do it. Subscribe to the channel. We do this every week. I have other fun videos I do throughout the season. This past week, I just predicted who I think is going to make the playoffs, win each round, and win the World Series. So if you haven't seen that yet, check that out. There's some outrageous picks in there for sure. Always is. And I just try to keep it fun and light. Otherwise, guys, we're going to jump into it. And with no real surprise, we have the same team in the bottom. 1-3 against Seattle, 1-2 against Arizona. And I don't think there's much to say about the White Sox anymore. They're last, and I don't think there's going to be much of a competition to get out of there, because I do think, even though this team's number 29, Miami Marlins, and I don't think realistically they're a number 29 if we're looking a couple months, years in the future. But with all the injuries and all the trades and all what they're kind of giving up, they seem to be the team that gets shut out every single week, and this week was no different. They went 1-2 against the Mets, 0-3 against Washington, so overall 1-5 against their own division rivals. Not a great look for them, so I think these two are pretty clearly in the bottom. Number 28, Colorado Rockies, sticking it there, 1-2 against Minnesota and 1-2 against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Interestingly, they gave up 17 runs to Minnesota earlier in the week, and then somehow in the one win against Pittsburgh, they bounced back and put up 16 runs of their own. So overall runs across the board. Run differential didn't really move that much because of all of that, but we see Colorado interesting always because they play in Coors. I talk about it so often. I probably beat a dead horse here, but they always seem to pick up some wins mainly because of that. On the road, Minnesota this week, they still picked up a win against top teams. So we haven't seen a big streaky team in Colorado this year like we've seen some of these other teams. Speaking of losing streaks, this team, I'm keeping them up one more spot still. Colorado may be on their tail. I think these guys play relatively soon, which would be super interesting. Maybe they already they might have played already, so I might be wrong there. I might be thinking of Colorado and the White Sox. But either way, the Oakland A's are on an 8-game losing streak, 0-3 against San Diego, 0-3 against Minnesota this week. They do have another game tonight. They had one rain out, so it was supposed to be a 4-game series. That one hasn't started yet. If you're new to this channel, I start this video before the Sunday Nighter, so the Yankees and Boston haven't played yet. Same with these guys, but 8-game losing streak. They're not moving up, that's for sure. If anything, they're kind of flirting with these other 3 teams, but it's a whole bunch of bad. Number 26, team that maybe is starting to gain some momentum, trying to pull away from the bottom of the pack. Seems like a little bit ways to go before they move up. They went 1-2 against Arizona, 2-1 against San Francisco. So 500 week. We have some rising, surprising stars like Kevin Pillar seeming to play out of his mind for the first time in a long while for the Angels. Maybe it's a career rebirth. Maybe it's just getting the opportunity on a club that has no expectations. But we're seeing some interesting things out of Angels. Every now and then they're really competitive, and other times they're just not competitive. It's pretty much the story of the bottom row. But 26, I don't think is too much debate. So these bottom 5, pretty clear. And when we start to get to number 25, we're starting to look at teams in that spectrum that I was talking about earlier. Number 25. I dropped them down. They're in the bottom row now, and then they've been one of the teams that have just been sliding. I think I wouldn't be surprised. I think I had them as number 6 early in April. Maybe it was up in the second row, but they were a lot higher, and it's just been disaster after disaster for the Cubs. 1-2 against Tampa Bay, 1-2 against St. Louis this week. And I think that's 6 series in a row against division rivals that they have lost, might even be 7, and it's just unacceptable in a National League Central division that requires you to be competitive in your division if you're going to make the playoffs. It's a tight division, and if you're going to make a threat in it, you got to win your series, and right now, they're worst in that division. They're losing in that division, and I don't really think they're putting much wins together with this roster they got going right now, so I think number 25 is a little bit, and the old number 25, I only moved them up 1 spot. Although they've been one of the hotter teams across the board, 2-1 against the Marlins, and then they sweep the San Diego Padres. So a 5-1 week. I think they're 8-2 over their last 10, and the Mets are maybe turning a corner. We saw something similar of this earlier in the season. I'm not quite buying in yet. I want to see it for another week, but the Mets are in one of that conversation. They're technically in the wild card hunt at this point, which is surprising. If you talked about this, and I maybe talked about this a few weeks ago, I thought they were out of it. They were locked in number 25. The bottom row seemed locked in, but it seems like maybe they're creeping along. There's a lot of teams right ahead of them here that they are very capable, if they keep this winning ways going, of starting to hop. And I'm interested to see how this next little bit goes. Number 23, I do have the Tampa Bay Rays. 0-1 to start the week against Baltimore. Then they have that series that I just talked about against the Cubs. They win that one. And then they play Atlanta this weekend, where I think maybe they have a chance to really get back in this playoff race, but they do lose that series. Atlanta has been one of those teams that have struggled defensively, but the bats seem to be alive and well against Tampa Bay, which in the past, Tampa Bay, their pitching has been their forefront, but when teams are starting to play Tampa right now, they are giving up fair more runs than we are used to in the past. I think Tampa Bay is clearly the worst team in the American League East, which makes it even harder for them to really start getting wins together and moving up this board. So I think number 23 is pretty concrete. Number 22, I do have the Pittsburgh Pirates. 2-1 against Colorado is pretty intense weekend against them. That one game where they gave up that massive amounts of runs does continue to have me have concerns about that. We saw some bloopers, I guess you could say, of the Pirates again on defense. Seems to be every year they're the ones making the blooper reel, not being able to put defense together. But they did start the week relatively tough against St. Louis as well. So overall, 500 a week. They went 1-2 against St. Louis, a team that they need to beat if they want to get in this playoff race. And right now, they're not on the outside looking in this division. And I don't know if they're going to be able to put together the wins if they're not beating the Brewers, they're not beating the Reds, they're not really beating the Cardinals. It's going to be tough because there's a lot of thickness ahead of them right now, and they're not showing me anything that shows that they can wade their way through. Number 21, it is one of those teams, though, that they're going to have to play against. They didn't really have an interesting week whatsoever. They had 5 games. When teams have 5 games, it's really hard to really move them much on the board. 1-1 against Cleveland, and then 1-2 over the weekend against Milwaukee Brewers. So Milwaukee seems to be walking away with this division. These two guys trying to fight and stay in this and stay a little bit ahead of the Cubs, but it seems like the gap between them and the other two seems to be growing because the middle is starting to pull away from these guys, and I want to see them go on a little bit of a streak. We saw Cincinnati have a little bit of a streak over the past 10 games, but it's cooled off, especially this week. A 5-game week can do that for you. What Cincinnati does next week is going to be pivotal on how I view this team going forward. Number 20, a team that has just been all over the place this season. I feel really bad talking about Texas because they were so strong coming off that World Series win, and they just haven't been able to maintain any real relevance and streaks whatsoever. They're hovering below 500 at this point. Got a lot of excitement earlier in the week when they win a series against the top-ranked Dodgers, 2-1, but then they play these guys, the Seattle Mariners, a series where they have to show up. This is their chance to make up some ground in this division race as Seattle begins to pull away. But they get swept, and to me, that is just a devastating blow for a team that's already been kind of struggling to get above 500. And with the rest of the teams, the Houston Astros seem to be getting their footing a little bit better. They're starting to pull away. They got 2 other teams that they should be able to beat up on, but they don't really beat up on them you would want. Number 20 seems to be as high as they can get. right now. Number 19, 2-1 against the Houston Astros, 1-2 against the LA Angels. So a 500 week against the American League West, nothing to write home about. A team that's been maintaining kind of 500, but I want to see more. When you have a chance to play a team like the Angels and other teams are just maintaining 500, I want to see sweeps. I want to see a little bit more momentum. And to lose that series, they salvaged it today. They avoided the sweep, but after a big series win against a team that I can rank relatively high compared to most people in the Astros earlier in the week, to come in and have a lousy series against the Angels, not what I like to see. So dropped them a little bit, and the offense has always been a concern for me on this team throughout the season. So I think maybe it's catching up to them against a team like the Angels. Number 18, I do move them up a row. It was a pretty good week for the Blue Jays, and it's been a little bit of experimenting with them in their roster overall, so it's been a little bit more exciting. Maybe this is the kick in the teeth they needed. 1-2 against Milwaukee. Had a chance to win that game, lose the rubber match. It's all right. They play against one of the top teams, and then they have Cleveland at home coming back from that road trip, and they win the series 2-1. Cleveland without their Jose Ramirez, so they did have a little bit of advantage there. They almost blew the game tonight, so there are still a lot of concerns, but we're starting to see an offense maybe come together as the Blue Jays are starting to put these guys in their lineup that haven't really been given a chance in the past. They got Clement. Horwitz has been called up. We saw Biggio get designated for assignment. Vogelbach getting designated for assignment. So if you look at the roster today, as you did for the first couple of months, it's completely different, and maybe that's the boost they need. If I saw a stat earlier this week that if the Jays scored 3 runs or more, they have a 33-11 record, something along those lines. Not exactly, but that's pretty crazy. So if they can sort out their offense, I think they're going to be a threat down the stretch here. Number 17. I had to move these guys up. I just don't know where to place this team. It feels like a team that shouldn't be doing as well as they are, but they seem to be winning, and they're one of those teams that are hovering around 500, and this week was just a prime example. 2-1 against Detroit, and then they sweep the Miami Marlins. The next 3 series they have are against the National League West teams. I think there's the Padres, the Giants, and the Diamondbacks, if I'm not mistaken, and for me, that's going to be a big impact in this middle part. If they can come out of that 9-10 game set and have a winning record, that's going to put a lot of confidence on this Washington team, who is not at all getting out of the playoff race, and it's super interesting to see them as high as they are. Number 16, I have the San Diego Padres. This team just can't get above 500 and stay above it. They get below it, they get back to it. Absolutely crazy team. They started the week sweeping the Oakland A's, and I thought, okay, Padres are finally going to live up to what I kind of feel they are, but then they blow it again, getting swept by the Mets. So it's just a 500 week, and a week where you would expect the Padres to have a winning week. I don't know what it is with this team. I can't sort out why sometimes they're really good and sometimes they're just absolutely terrible. Seems like one of the most inconsistent / consistent teams I've ever met. Number 16 right there, smack dab in the middle. Number 15. Arizona 2-1 against the Angels, 2-1 against the White Sox. So a 4-2 week. Not super excited about that considering it's against 2 teams in the bottom row, but that's what you need. If you're going to be pushing for the playoffs, you're going to want to win those series. And Arizona still dealing the season without Gallen, still dealing it without Merrill Kelly. So the fact that they're kind of starting to build some momentum against weaker teams and sticking around in the middle of the pack, I like to see it. They've been 18, 19, 17 for probably 5 weeks before now, so a little bit of an upward trajectory. I think we're seeing Gallen pitch a simulated game next Tuesday, so he might be back soon, which will be a big boost to this roster. I think overall, looking at them, I do like them to make a push for the playoffs. Number 14, Detroit Tigers, 1-2 against Washington, 1-2 against Houston. A losing week for them. But overall, we have a couple teams winning, but they were a little bit further down. Detroit was hovering a little bit further up, and they're starting to slow down, and I don't really know what caused it this week. I didn't follow them super closely this week, but I think they're going to maybe sort it out. I don't have much else to say about Detroit, honestly. 13, we got the Houston Astros, and this is probably one of the most debatable spots Of course, if we're looking strictly at standings, you would put Houston down here, but we have to remember how bad of a start they had, how many injuries they had to their starting pitching. Still do have a lot of injuries, but if you really look at their last month and a half, they are playing above 500 baseball, and I think that as long as they maintain that kind of winning along the way, that they're right there where number 13 is, and it makes a lot of sense. 1-2 against Washington, or 1-2 against San Fran, sorry, and then 2-1 against Detroit. So I think they're edging out for the most part. We've seen Houston beat teams like the Blue Jays. We've seen them beat Detroit now. We've seen them beat other teams that are below here. Seems pretty consistent, but sometimes when they seem to match up against these upper echelon teams, they kind of get slapped around. So it's interesting to watch. I expect them to kind of keep this status quo going, and that's kind of why I have them number 13. Number 12, moved them up into this row the last second, and it was just another winning week for the Cardinals. I feel like I've been talking about it week after week after week now. They were in the bottom row at one point earlier in the season, and I thought maybe this was the end, but they seem to just be one of those teams that are destined to make a push. 2-1 against the Cubs, 2-1 against the Pittsburgh Pirates, so two of their division rivals, trying to create a little bit of a gap there from the bottom three of this division. It seems to be working. The pitching has been pretty great for St. Louis, and some of these younger guys coming into getting their chance on their roster have been making an impact. So it's been fun to watch Cardinals. They've kind of seemed to be turning the corner. Contreras' injury doesn't seem to be holding them back too much, but could be all smoke and mirrors. We could see the wheels fall off. It wouldn't surprise me. We're starting to get into teams that are starting to be on the upper side of the 500, maybe crossed over 500, and teams that are very much in the playoff race, and in my books, playoff capable teams. Number 11, as a little bit of a preview, this is one of my most interesting picks in that playoff prediction video. I did have Boston being the number 6 seed in the American League, and this week was no different. They went 2-1 against the Philadelphia Phillies. That played a big role. Boston just seems to step up to the competition like they are meant to. 1-1 so far against the Yankees. They're playing the rubber match tonight. And then next week is going to be their first series against the Blue Jays. Based on this, you would think I'm leaning towards Boston, but with the Blue Jays on the up and rise, there could be a big, impactful series in terms of the overall view of how I see the American League shaping up. So I'm looking excited for that series. It's going to be interesting, but right now Boston seems to be on the outside of that top 10. Top 10 seems to be pretty concrete. I think if you look at most power rankings, everyone's going to have the same teams in the top 10. Number 10, Atlanta Braves. They went 1-2 against Baltimore, 2-1 against the Tampa Bay Rays. A little bit of a bounce back, a little 500 week against a team that's been struggling to get the offensive going. They avoided getting swept by Baltimore by winning that third and final match, so that was a little bit of a boost, and then they go in there and beat Tampa Bay. So can they build on it? The rotation seems to be going along pretty good. Chris Sale having an amazing breakout season, continues to be dominant. Are they missing some guys? Sure. But right now, they're sitting in there, they're being competitive. Can they go and start winning some games? They need to play some of these lower teams, and they need to win those series. That has been a struggle over the past month, and it has dropped them down. They were stable in the top 5 for quite a while, but it has dropped down quite a bit. Number 9, I do have the Minnesota Twins, 2-1 against Colorado, 3-0 against Oakland. Just again, a team that seems to really beat up on the teams they're supposed to, which has been fun to watch. And then there's times where they start going on massive losing streaks against not necessarily teams that they should do badly against, but nonetheless, they've been one of the most streaky teams. But at the end of it, they win more than they lose, and they've shown highlights of both pitching and bat, so I do like them at number 9. Number 8, it's not been a great week for this team, dropping a few spots, but can you really blame them? They played 2 of the top 4 teams on the power rankings last week, 1-3 against the Yankees. The Yankees just continue to be absolute powerhouses. The pitching has been such a staple for the Kansas City Royals this season, and the Yankees put up double digits, I think twice, at least once, against them, and really managed to really show that, hey, the Royals can be hit around if that happens. Then they go against the Dodgers this weekend, 1-2 there. Again, I'm not holding too much about them. This is a young team. They're an up-and-coming team. It's a surprise to see them where they are now when we started the season, so got to be a lot of credit there. Number 7, they are flirting with danger, this team. And by danger, I mean like they possibly should be in the top row, and they might be in the top row for a lot of teams. 3-1 against the White Sox, sweeping the Texas Rangers. It's just now very clear, like a big separation between those two teams there. Seattle starting to demonstrate they're pretty much cruising to win this division. The only kind of concern, I want to see them play some more Houston matches. I know they have played. I want to see more. I want to see this team continue to be this consistent. The only reason they haven't broke into this top 6 is because this top 6 feels like they've been stronger for even longer. So like number 7 and up seems to be a different era than the rest right now in this board. But Seattle, they are flirting with it. And number 6 is the team that they are chasing relatively closely. Another one of those situations I talked about with Cincy. Mind you, they played each other, so that makes sense. They only had 5 games this week. 1-1 against Cincy, 1-2 against Toronto. So 2-3 a week. It's not going to really be enough for me to put them at 7, but Seattle is hungry and chasing them. Ramirez away for their series against Blue Jays. So we see some awesome stuff out of Cleveland. I want to see what this next week brings, but they got some teams on their tail, and they're quickly going to find out. This top row is no joke. You have to keep winning and winning to stay up here. Number 5, a team that does do that. Nothing too crazy. They're not like sweeping and like running away with massive winning streaks, but they tend to be, every time I'm writing up the sheet each week, they seem to be winning every series 2-1, 2-1. A lot of that going on, and it happened again this week. Toronto, they do that 2-1, and then they got Cincy 2-1. So 2 teams that, again, not super high up on the board, but they're winning. And Milwaukee, they're making that gap a little bit bigger. St. Louis is hungry. They're after them, but Milwaukee has built themselves quite a little lead here, and as long as they keep playing the good baseball that they have, I expect them to stay in that top 5. So now we get to the top 4. This team's been a lot of the same, and I couldn't move them up, even though they had a pretty good series over the weekend against the Royals. Losing earlier in the week 1-2 against Texas made me think, all right, 500 week can't really move you up a spot on that, even though the teams ahead of you, we'll talk about number 3 in a second, didn't have the best of weeks. Either did you. So in order to really pounce up this board, you're going to have great week after great week. Number 3, I do have those Philadelphia Phillies, 1-2 against Boston, 1-2 against Baltimore. And honestly, if that game on Friday against Baltimore didn't go extra innings, didn't have a massive rain delay, who knows, they might have been swept by Baltimore. And today, watching Corbin Burns and Wheeler go duke it out, and Wheeler getting bested by the Orioles, drops them down. I've talked about it as a concern. Phillies not having to play a lot of these top teams. Now we're seeing them play 2 teams in the top 11 this week, and they go 2-4. It's 1 week. We're going to see how they bounce back. Of course, the Phillies are overall a great roster, and I don't expect this to mean too much. But we got 2 hungry teams in the National League that have been capable of doing it, that might be wanting that number 3 spot. And that leads us to number 2. I do have the Baltimore Orioles at number 2. And it was a great week for them. Started the week winning that last game against the Tampa Bay Rays, 2-1 against Atlanta, and then they go in there and beat the Phillies. So overall, coming into this week, 5-2, great week for the Orioles. Bradish seems to go down with an injury possibly, and we'll see how that turns out for them. And the starting pitching starting to be maybe a little bit thin. We'll see how that plays out for them. But we're seeing other pitchers that seem to just step up on this team. Grayson Rodriguez having an amazing, possibly consider Cy Young. Maybe that's a little crazy kind of year, but it's been a fun year for the Orioles, and they continue to be competitive. I didn't put them at number 1 because this team continues, in my books, to be that number 1 seed. I know the Orioles did beat them earlier in the season, but we're going to get to see that rematch. I think it's in New York. Pretty sure it's in New York. They're going to be playing first thing this week. That's going to probably decide who's going to be sitting there next week, guys. And the Yankees had, another great week. 3-1 clubbing, in my opinion, of the Royals. So that really helped impact why I continue to keep them there. Whereas the Orioles, let's do it. Let's see how it goes this week. Otherwise, guys, that's how you do it. 30 teams in the books. Let me know what you guys think. If you've made it this far and have not subscribed to the channel, what are you really doing here? Honestly, subscribe to the channel. We do giveaways on this channel. I just gave away a hat when we crossed over 1,000 subs. Probably be doing another one in a few hundred subs again. So you have to be subbed to get the notification, fun stuff. Otherwise, guys, let me know what you guys think. Where am I out to lunch, etc., etc., and we will see you for that next video.